we have gone through some very strange events. In fact, recently I was talking with someone, and she was going through a very difficult time, and she said, I'm just wrestling with some feelings that I'm having towards God. And she said, I feel bad about it, I feel guilty, but I'm angry at God. And she said, and I'm bitter at people. And I'm confused as to why things happen the way they did. It's very hard to know exactly what to say to people when they're going through things like that. It's hard to know what to do. It's hard to know how to carry yourself. But I just stood there and we talked, and I thought, she's not the only one that has had feelings like that. Or that you've gone through something and you're wrestling with it and you think, I don't understand why something like this is happening to me. Or maybe you're tempted to be angry at God, or maybe you're just flat out angry at God for the way things have played out in your life. We look at a righteous man like Ezekiel in a time that was very confusing, very stressful, and we see that he is trying to preach to a people that just don't want to hear the message that he has to preach. He's trying to preach to the Israelites to turn back to God, and the Israelites aren't listening, and God is making Ezekiel do, or having him do, these very strange object lessons, if you will. He's laying on his side for an entire year. That wasn't good enough, so he flipped over and had to lay on the other side for an entire year, on the ground. And then he's doing all, as you read through the book, I mean, it's like, as you get into chapter 2, it's like every chapter that you go through, you're like, what is going on in this book? And it opens up with this vision from the Lord, and there's this loud wind, and there's these clouds, and there's these strange creatures, and as you're reading through, I was thinking, as I was reading through it in preparation for this lesson, what's happening? I can't even picture what I'm reading inside my mind. But as you work your way through the book of Ezekiel, you find out that we don't really have to have all the answers. We don't really have to know all of the details. I want to make some comparisons between the time of Ezekiel and what he was going through and our time right now. And maybe if you're going through some things in your life, that you can look at the life of Ezekiel and you can find some encouragement. I decided to title this lesson. Usually I don't title my lessons, which is why when you go on YouTube, Wes just uploads them and then it's just kind of like a bunch of random numbers, because he's like, what's your title? I'm like, I didn't really put a title to it. But I decided to actually title this one because I wanted to remember what I had learned in going through this study without having to read through all of my notes. But I did title it, Here I Stand on My Feet. As you go through Ezekiel, you notice this terminology that's basically using that phrase, stand on your feet, or God stood them on their feet, or God stands them up. In fact, when you look in I believe it's chapter 2, the Spirit of the Lord has come upon Ezekiel, and it's very strange how the wording is there and what happens afterwards. But the Spirit basically says to Ezekiel, stand on your feet. And Ezekiel doesn't even get a chance to stand up on his feet. It says right after that, the Spirit came into him and stood him on his feet. So I don't know if Ezekiel wasn't doing it fast enough, or maybe he was confused as to what was happening, but the Spirit commanded him to stand on his feet. He didn't do it, and the Spirit came into him and forced him to do so. But you have this language all throughout the book talking about this idea of standing. And there's some confusion that happens with it. And so I titled it, Here I Stand on My Feet, because I thought as I looked at Ezekiel, and I thought as I thought about all of the lives of both members here and other people that I've been talking to lately that have been going through a very difficult time, here we stand on our feet, and some of us aren't sure why we're standing on our feet. Some of us have no idea why in the world we're standing up on our feet right now. Why am I here? And that question is thrown around. Why am I here right now? Or why did this happen to me? And there's no answers to that. But we think, but here we are. Here I stand on my feet. And I want to walk through what Ezekiel has done. We're not going to go, don't worry, we're going to get to 37, but we're not going to go 1 all the way to 37. We're just going to look at 1 and 2 very quickly, and then we're going to go straight into 37 from there. You have a righteous man in Babylonian captivity, and it seems like a frustrating place to be, because it opens up, just with a very strange verse and talking about this dramatic entrance of God. As you see in verse 4, as I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. So Ezekiel is seeing all of these visions, and he is being encouraged and motivated, but everybody else around him is in Babylonian captivity, as well as him. And I looked, as I was reading through it, I thought, man, Ezekiel is a righteous man. He has this very close connection with God, to the point where it opens up with, and Ezekiel saw the Spirit of God. So he has this connection with him, but Ezekiel is right there. He's still in Babylonian captivity. And there are some who will argue that Ezekiel actually saw Jesus, or that's who it's talking about here. So Ezekiel has these amazing experiences, but it doesn't change the fact that he's still in captivity. And I thought about, the family here at Farley is great, and it's wonderful, and there are so many blessings that go into being a part of this church family and being a part of the church anyway, but it doesn't change the fact that we're still in the world. Whatever's going on in your life right now, just because you're here and maybe a part of the church family here, as soon as you leave, it doesn't change the fact that you are still in captivity. You're still in the world. You still have all of these problems. But we're going to see something very cool. Let's go now to chapter 37. And I want to just look at that first verse for a second. It says, the hand of the Lord was upon me. The hand of the Lord was upon me. I don't know always the right words to say. I have found that out in a way that I didn't know before very recently. I don't know what to say always. But I do believe in the power of God. I do believe in the hand of God, watching over, guiding us through everything. That might mean you feel a little bit awkward. Might mean you feel a little bit uncomfortable. That might mean that you have to experience maybe some very painful feelings in this life. But we have to believe in the power of God. But look, as you see as it goes on, the hand of the Lord was upon me. That's great. That's encouraging. What a comfort. And he brought me out in the spirit of the Lord. That's great. And set me down in the middle of the valley. And it was full of bones. The hand of the Lord was upon me. That is not what I would think would happen. If the hand of the Lord comes on you, wow, what's going to happen? Where am I going? This is going to be a great experience. And then you're placed in the middle of a valley surrounded by bones. If you've read the visions that have gone all the way up to this point, I wonder if Ezekiel stood there in the valley and goes, I'm not even going to question it anymore. After all of the strange things that I've seen, I'm not even going to question this. And you see how Ezekiel has grown all the way up into this point. So he is if you look at even chapter 19, it's just basically Ezekiel's lament as he's mourning over the fact that Israel is a very stubborn people. They're not listening, and it's tragic. But then you get to this chapter, but he's still not fully convinced that Israel can ever change or that they'll ever turn back to God, because they have a very long history of not doing that. But it says the valley was full of bones. Verse 2 says, and he led me around among them, and behold, there were very many on the surface of the valley, and behold, they were very dry. So Ezekiel's walking through, and he is completely surrounded by death and a very depressing landscape. How do you make sense of all that? And then God asks him a question that is supposed to provoke some growth. And he said to me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" And I answered, "O Lord, you know." When we go through some trials, when we go through some things that we don't understand, there are some questions that we need to answer about God. That we need to answer that are supposed to provoke a growing faith. When we're in the middle of our valley surrounded by death, everything looks completely depressing and down, and there's not a whole lot of hope there. There are some questions that we need to answer, and the first one is, can God get me through this? Can He? Does God have the power to get me through this? Because what Ezekiel is wrestling with is, will the people ever actually listen to God? Are they ever going to be any better? Because he's spent so much time and so much effort with these people, and they're not moving an inch. But you see, right after this, God is about to prove something very incredible to him. He says, "O Lord, you know." Then he said to me, "Prophesy over these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord." Well, that sounds familiar to the lessons he's been preaching to the Israelites. And he does. And it says in verse 5, "Thus says the Lord God to these bones, Behold, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live, and I will lay sinews." I had to practice that word several times before actually giving this lesson. And I still don't know if I'm right. Andrea's not here. Janelle is. Some other medical people. Sinews. Does that sound right? I don't know all the technical medical stuff. "But upon you, and the flesh will come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I'm the Lord." So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, listen to this. There was a sound, and behold, a rattling. And the bones came together, bone to its bone, and I looked, and behold, there were sinews on them, and flesh had come upon them, and skin had covered them, but there was no breath in them. And he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to the breath, Thus says the Lord God, Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on the slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they lived and stood on their feet, an exceedingly great army." If you were a part of that situation, and you were on either side, if you were either Ezekiel or if you were in that pile of bones, and you were all of a sudden put back together and standing there, you know one thing. I'm standing on my feet right now. I don't know exactly how, but I do know that God did it. The kind of attitude that we need to carry as Christians, especially if we're going through a time where we're facing things that we don't understand, is I don't know all the answers to why exactly this happened, but I believe in the power of God. I believe that God can put me back together and can put anybody back together. And if we don't have all the answers, we can know that God placed me on my feet. God can keep me on my feet. And God can guide my feet through this life. But then flip it around to Ezekiel. He's the righteous man. And he's watching all of these bones rattle. And he's seeing all of the sinews and flesh and skin come together. He's watching all of that happen. He didn't know exactly how it happened. He heard the bones rattling, which sounds terrifying. I don't know how he didn't go running, especially when you read that God placed him in the middle of the valley, surrounded by bones, and so there's really no escape for him. He's surrounded by a bunch of bones that are rattling and moving and sticking together and coming to life. Did he know exactly how that happened? No. But when he saw those people standing on his feet, he could say, God did it, I don't know how. We don't have to know the answers to everything. How are we going to get through whatever we're struggling with? I don't know. You may not know either, but we do know that God is very capable of doing it and that He will. I don't know what you're wrestling with this morning. Everybody seems to be wrestling with something. I mean, especially 2020, it has been so random. There's a Sahara sandstorm or something like that. I mean, there's a virus, and it's like, what is that? And it's almost like how Ezekiel was. The bones start rattling and everything, and it doesn't say that he was freaked out or that he was surprised. It was just kind of like, God's doing His thing again. But it's like we look at a world and we don't make sense of it, but we can say, I know the power of God. I'm following in the footsteps of God, and God's going to get me through this, even if I look around and I can't make sense of anything that's happening. God is the one that can keep us on our feet. I switched lessons last minute. You may be able to tell because the organization jumped around a little bit, but it's because after a few things happened this week, I scrapped my entire lesson I had planned to preach. It didn't fit. It didn't seem right because there's a lot of people that are hurting and that are going through some things that they don't understand. Maybe you don't understand. And so I felt the need to switch it last minute. But even though it was perhaps more of a jumbled up lesson, or maybe it was just kind of a random, okay, now we're in Ezekiel 37, dry bones, here we go. It might seem that way, but I hope that if anything this morning, you've been able to be reminded of how powerful God truly is. And that if you are looking around at your life and you don't seem to be able to understand or make sense of what's going on, remember who can keep you on your feet. And remember what we have to look forward to if we're righteous. I'd encourage you to read through Ezekiel, but please don't ask me a lot of questions if you run upon something that you don't understand, because there's a lot in that book I did not realize I didn't really fully get. But if you're struggling this morning and you need prayers, you need a boost, you need some strength, you need some love, you need, well, we can't really hug, but maybe some people could break the rules. I don't mind personally. But if you need something from this church, you need that encouragement, or you need to make a lifestyle change, but you feel like maybe you've tried way too many times and it's hopeless and that's just not going to happen, why not come forward as we stand and as we sing and let us help you with that. I got that a little backwards, but now let's stand and sing, and if you need help, please come forward.